everybody, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. We are finally getting the rules video started for Star Wars Imperial Assault. It's going to be a three-parter because it's a pretty hefty amount of rules to get out there. And basically, this first video is going to be the overall rules that kind of apply to both campaign and skirmish. Then the next video is going to be specifically for campaign, the rules that are different or the additional rules, I should say, for campaign. The third video will be skirmish, which will be what's different from campaign, as opposed to skirmish. It'll show you exactly what you need to know for that one, how the rules are different. For instance, the heroes are played differently in skirmish mode if you use their characters than they are in the campaign mode. And we'll get into all of that. So this first video is going to cover the overall rules. Without anything else, let's get right into it. The core action of Imperial Assault happens during missions. I'll be teaching the basic rules for playing missions, which can be found in the Learn to Play rulebook included with this game. This video will focus on the rules from the perspective of the campaign game, which all of the campaign missions are found inside of this campaign guide. I won't go too in-depth into the guide itself, as it really needs to be kept secret from the Rebel players, otherwise it'll spoil a lot of what the game has to offer. In a later video, I'll teach you the difference between the rules for the campaign and the rules for the skirmish missions, which is a two-player variant of Imperial Assault. Additionally, if you have any questions beyond the basic rules covered, they can be answered in the rules reference guide. That's right, you get 4 different guides for this game. Additional questions, more niche scenarios, very specific questions can be answered inside the rules reference guide. It is alphabetized, so this is not a good way to learn the game, as it doesn't make any sense chronologically how it teaches you. It is just everything, as you can see, is alphabetized for ease of use. Included in the Learn to Play guide is a tutorial mission. We'll begin by setting up this mission. The first thing you need to do is assemble the map, and you can see at the bottom of this map, as with all the other maps in the game, are all the different map tiles you're going to need to create this particular map. As a side note, there are a lot of map tiles, and they're all double-sided, so what you might want to do is find a way to organize them. What I found works best for me is the largest of them are just loose in the box. Then I have the next size down grouped together, and these are of they fit in the bag in such a way that I can actually have them numbered in order, so it makes it very easy to find. And then the next size down again in order, and after that I've got all the tiny end pieces along with the hallway pieces. You can organize them however you want, but that is what I found works easiest for me. Otherwise, you spend a lot of time sorting through all these tiles to figure out which ones you're going to use to set up a map. All right, once the map itself is assembled, then you're going to check for doors right there. You're going to look for terminals and crates, any other special tokens you might see on the map. Now from this point, I'm going to verge off a little bit from what the tutorial mission itself tells you to do. In the tutorial mission, there is no start spot for the Rebel players because it tells you exactly where to put them. In a regular campaign mission, you're going to have a starting icon on a specific tile, so let's say it's this one. You'll choose who's going to be the Imperial and who's going to be the Rebels. Now, once you make this choice, it's important to keep in mind that whoever the Imperial is will be the Imperial for the duration of the campaign, and the same with the Rebels. So let's say we've got a 3-player game going here. Our Rebels have chosen to be Garkin and Gideon Argus. They're going to place their figures. One of them will have to be on that starting location, and the next one will be in a spot as close to the starting location as possible. So any of these adjacent spots will be fine. So we'll say right there for Garkin. Now every hero has a class deck, and inside this class deck are all kinds of upgrades for your abilities and everything. One thing that you have to have at the beginning of the game, though, that's included, is a particular weapon your hero is going to start with. In the case of Garkin, it's a vibro axe. Now, he's the only one that can use this, and it's obvious because he's got his picture on the back. And so you're going to go through and get the starting weapons for each of your characters. Now, it should be noted that normally in a 3-player game, if the Rebels are only controlling 2 heroes, you're going to have additional health that is represented by a rewards card that's in the rewards deck. Each hero gets an additional 10 health. They also each get 2 activations. We're not going to do that just for simplicity's sake. We're going to keep it as is for this instructional video. Now that we've got our heroes out, let's take a closer look at their cards. What you're going to find on every card, obviously got the photograph of your hero. You've got their name, a little bit of a descriptor there for what they are. Here you've got their health, which is going to be the number of hit points they can receive, or the number of hits they can receive before they are defeated. Here you've got their endurance, which relates to the amount of strain they can endure, which we'll get to that later. Here you've got their speed, which is the number of squares, the number of spaces that they can move on the board. And here you've got which defense die they're going to roll. It's either black or white, and we'll get into the differences of those in a little bit as well. And down here you have strength, insight, and tech, which are how well they'll do against certain tests. Now these tests don't come up very often, but you will run into them more the further you get into the campaign. And then you've got special abilities for them as well. On the weapons card, obviously you got the name up here, you've got the picture of the weapon right here. You've got a little bit of a descriptor, any sort of special abilities, in this case a surge ability. And then over here you have the type of attack and the number of dice, as well as the type of dice that are rolled when doing that attack. Next, you're going to make sure that each hero has an activation token. Next, the Imperial player is going to prepare his deployment cards, and let's say in this case the map calls for an Imperial officer, a regular Imperial officer, which you can tell because of the gray borders around this card, and an elite Royal Guard, which you can tell it's elite because of the red. He will place these cards out face up, and probably going to be on the opposite side of the table, so they're probably facing that way. We'll just flip them over so it's not driving you crazy when you're looking at them. And they will get placed out wherever it is that the particular map tells you to. So let's just say, for the sake of this, that it's going to be here and here. Finally, you're going to want the dice, supply crate cards, and condition tokens nearby as well. Next, you will begin activating your characters. Now, in a campaign, the Rebels will activate first one of their characters, and then the Imperial, and go back and forth. In a skirmish mode, it's based on initiative. We'll cover both of those in detail in future videos. Right now, just keep in mind that when you activate, you can perform any 2 of the following actions: gain movement, attack, interact, rest, and any other special action. After that comes the status phase, but before we get to that, let's take a look in detail at each of these actions. Let's say Gideon Argus was outside here, and he wanted to use his gain movement action. So he says he's going to use his gain movement action, and what that really means is that he has now taken his speed, which is 4, and gained 4 movement points. Now, he can use those movement points at any point during the rest of his activation. He can move 1 space, and then do his second action, and then move the additional 3 after. Or he can use all 4. Or he can use 3 in action and then 1 movement point. It's completely up to Gideon's controller, Gideon's player, which one he's going to use. Or how he's going to use it, I should say. Now, one thing I may not have made clear before is that with these actions, all of them can be used twice. You can use both your actions during activation with the same action, for instance, moving twice, if you want to. The one that's different is attacking. Only heroes can attack twice. So none of the Imperial characters are going to be able to attack twice. Only the heroes can do that. So how do you attack? Well, first thing, you're going to choose a hostile target, and then you're going to roll the dice on the deployment cards. So, for instance, Garkin here is going to choose this Royal Guard. He's going to look at his Vibroax. You see the red and the yellow die there. And he's going to roll and see what he gets. So there's his dice results. The defender, meanwhile, is going to check his card. And see the defense right down here with a black die. He's going to roll his and see what he gets, which actually he got a pretty good result there. The target is going to suffer the damage minus the block. So in this case, these symbols right here count as damage. And let's go through this real quick while we've got it here. These symbols count as damage. That's a surge. And that's everything you're going to have on these dice except for the numbers, which are for range, or more specifically, accuracy. On the black die, these are blocks. And you can see you've got 2 and there's a 1. And then that's an evade, which cancels out a surge. On a white die, you've got blocks as well, the evade. You also have a blank spot, which means you're not going to get any benefit. And then you've got the dodge, which means the attack completely missed you. The rest of these die, the red, blue, green, they have the same as the yellow die do, just in different amounts and variations. So here, 4 damage minus 3 block means Garkon did 1 damage to that Royal Guard. Let's say Garkon had rolled this instead. So he's got 3 damage, 3 blocks, so none of those damage are going to get through. But then Garkon has 2 surges right here, which can be used for these 2 surges, Pierce and Cleave. Now, keep in mind that if you're doing a melee attack, you must be next to the individuals you're attacking. If you're doing a ranged attack, you must get the accuracy necessary. So for instance, let's say Gideon Argus was going to attack this guy. He's got the blue and yellow, so that's what he's going to roll. And you can see he got a 3. So he has 3 accuracy. That means he can hit something that's 3 spaces away. So let's say 1, 2. That guy got it. If he had been attacking, well, he couldn't attack this guy because Garkon's in the way, but let's say Garkon wasn't there. And he attacked that guy 1, 2, 3. He would have missed him. He wasn't accurate enough with his shot. Now that brings us to line of sight, which is actually a fairly easy method for line of sight in this game. Basically, you're going to take one corner, any corner of your character, and draw a line, a straight line, to 2 corners of the defending character. So in this case, if you had Gideon, draw a line from here to that corner of this square, and a line from the same one of Gideon's corner to another corner of the guy he's attacking, and there you go, he has line of sight. Now, line of sight cannot be drawn through other characters, and the line of sight lines that are coming from the single point on the attacker cannot overlap each other. Next, let's look at the interact action. Basically, if you're adjacent to a door, you interact with the door, you remove the door from the map, it's open, it can't be closed again. Or if you're next to a terminal, you can then interact with the terminal. Also, if you're on top of the terminal, you can interact with it. Crates, if you're next to the crate, you're going to remove the crate, you're going to put it next to your character or on your character. Keep it with your character. You'll then draw a card from the crate supply deck. You will get that item. This only lasts for that particular mission. Keep that with your character until you're ready to use it. Also, the crates are going to give you additional credits at the end of a mission. The final action that you can take is rest. The way that works, you look at your endurance. It's 4 in the case of Garkon. He's going to take as many strain off of him as he has endurance. But if he only has 2 strain in this case, that means he has 2 more endurance than he has strain, and the rest of it gets taken off from the damage. And then the game states that special actions can be used as well, which would be anything indicated by that symbol right there. In this case, it's charge for Garkon. So once 2 actions are used, the activation is done. You flip your activation token over to the red side, indicating that that hero has gone. Before moving on to the status phase, let's take a closer look at some additional core rules. Let's go back to the abilities, for instance, with charge right here. Abilities frequently will be prefaced with, for instance, the action symbol that I already showed you, but also the strain symbol here. And in this case, it means that not only does he have to use an action, he's also going to gain 2 strain to use this ability. So how does strain work? Well, whenever an action by you or another player causes you to take strain, you place these tokens on your character. You can only take strain up to the amount of endurance that you have, and a player may never voluntarily take more strain than their endurance allows. However, let's say a player is maxed out on strain, so in this case Garkin has 4, he has 4 endurance, and some sort of ability by another player causes him to take additional strain. He'll instead take the additional strain as damage. Also, in addition to rest, which is the primary way of getting rid of strain, a hero can also spend 1 surge to get rid of 1 strain, and this can be used once per activation. Heroes are also allowed to suffer additional strain for 1 additional movement point. For instance, if Garkon decided in true Wookiee form to begin cowardly retreating, he could go 1, 2, 3, 4. He would then be out of movement points, but he could suffer 1 strain, move an additional space. He can do this twice during activation, so he could actually take a 2nd strain and go 1 more space there. When a hero suffers damage equal to his health, so here Garkon has 13, let's say he takes the 14th piece of damage there, he becomes wounded. When any other figure other than a hero, such as this Imperial officer over here, takes damage equal to his health, and let's say 1, 2, 3, he now has damage equal to his health of 3, he's dead, he's gone. His figure's taken off the map, and his deployment card goes back into the Imperial player's hand. But when a hero is defeated, he becomes wounded. And what that means is, remove all the damage tokens and flip to the wounded side. Now you can see on this wounded side, it's very similar, but not the same. For instance, he no longer has the rage ability when he's wounded. His endurance is 3 and his speed is 3 instead of 4 and 4. Now on top of that, these are different, and while you might not be able to tell just by looking at it without having played the game, these are more difficult to successfully roll what you need than they are on this side of the card. If a wounded hero suffers yet again damage equal to his health on that side of the card, he now withdraws from the battle, his figure comes off the board, and he no longer takes part in this mission. Let's talk a little bit about movement restrictions. The obvious one is going to be these solid black lines, which represent walls. Obviously, you can't move through a wall. I will point out, though, that you are allowed to move diagonally across a wall like that, but you clearly cannot move through a wall. Walls are also going to block line of sight. That probably doesn't need to be stated, but there you have it. Moving on to impassable. Impassable is this dotted red line you see here and here and here. A little closer view of it. There you go right there. This dotted red lines that you see right there are going to be considered impassable. You cannot move through this, but the spaces are considered adjacent. So here and here would be adjacent. And on top of that, it does not block line of sight. On the other hand, blocked is going to be this red solid line here. A closer view of it is this right here. This red solid line cannot be entered, and you cannot trace line of sight through it. Now with a door, spaces separated by a door are not considered adjacent, and you obviously cannot move through them until you've opened the door, nor can you trace line of sight through a door. And difficult terrain, which there is not on this map, however, difficult terrain is marked by a solid blue line. A lot of times it's going to be water, as is the case here, but it could be something else. And you basically must spend an additional movement point to enter that space. So from here to here is going to cost you 2 movement points, and from here to here would also cost you 2 movement points. Conversely, if you move from here to here, that's 2. From here to here is only going to be 1 because it's the space you're entering. This doesn't block line of sight, obviously doesn't block movement, just makes movement more difficult. Now for movement through figures. If it's a friendly figure, for instance, if Gideon is trying to move through Garkon, that's not a problem. He can go 1, 2, it's just like moving through an empty space. He cannot end his movement where a friendly figure is, but he can move through without a problem. If instead he wants to go through this royal guard, he still can do it, but it's going to be just like moving through difficult terrain. He'll count it 1, 2, 3, like that. And again, cannot end his movement on that figure. Okay, now let's talk about a few keywords. The first one we're going to talk about is blast. Now, the example I'm going to give you is here on Finn Cygnus's special ability right here. Havoc Shot gives him Blast 1. Used while attacking with a ranged weapon, this attack gains Blast 1. So how does Blast work? I'm going to use the Gideon figure here, but let's say he's firing at this Royal Guard right here. If he hits, if he causes damage to this Royal Guard, then every figure, door, an item next to that Royal Guard is going to take damage, whatever the number is of the blast. So with Blast 1, regardless of how much damage this guy takes, as long as he takes at least 1 damage, these two guys would also take 1 damage from the blast. Next, let's look at Pierce, which you can find here on the Vibro Axe that Garkon starts with, Pierce 1. What that means is if you use that, now granted you're going to have to use a surge ability for this, but for Pierce 1, you're going to ignore 1 block. It doesn't matter how many blocks there are, you ignore one of them, so it's like they don't even exist. With Cleave, if the target of the attack suffers damage, the attacker may then choose a different valid hostile figure as a target to suffer the cleave damage. So, for instance, if Garkon was right here, and he attacked this fine gentleman and damaged him, and he was able to use the cleave ability, it says cleave 1 damage, he could then deal that damage to that Royal Guard there. It cannot be prevented by block, and it does not inflict conditions from the original attack. That, by the way, is the same with Blast. Blast cannot be prevented by a block because there's some figures that may have an automatic block built in. It cannot be prevented by block, and it does not inflict any conditions that the original target would have gotten. Next, let's talk about Recover, which you can find on this Probe Droid card. Now, the way that works basically, in this case, it requires a surge, and if you trigger the Recover, so if you have a surge you can spend it on, then you recover the amount of damage listed. So in this case, recover 1 damage. It's as simple as that. If the Probe Droid had a damage, he rolled a surge, he could then recover 1 damage. If you have an ability that says Recover Strain, you can use that first to recover strain, but then the excess will recover damage the same way it does when you're resting. And finally, let's look at Reach here for the Royal Guards. And what that's going to do is they may perform a melee on a figure 2 spaces away. So instead of having to be adjacent, which by the way is considered 1 space away, this Royal Guard can attack melee right here with that 1 space between them, but he's 2 spaces away. He must have line of sight, but accuracy is not required. So a figure that takes up 1 space, such as Gideon and this Royal Guard, are considered small figures. A figure that takes up more than 1 space, such as this guy right here, is considered a large figure. When tracing line of sight, it may be traced to any of the spaces that figure takes up. Large figures cannot move diagonally, and they can rotate their base, however, by spending 1 movement and continuing to occupy at least half the spaces it did before. Now, in the case of this guy, he has a rounded base, so it's a little more difficult to see. But in the case of this ATST, you can see that he can rotate his base like this so that he can fit into that space there. And he still has maintained his base in at least half of the spaces he was in prior to rotating. Let's take a look at these conditions over here. There are 3 different kinds of conditions. You have bleed, stun, and focus. And there are cards that come with the game for quick reference to show you how they work. Basically, with bleeding, during your activation, after you resolve an action other than the action listed below, you will suffer 1 strain. So basically, you have to use your first action to get rid of this. Otherwise, you're going to be suffering strain. With stun, you cannot attack or voluntarily exit your space. The one thing you can do is use an action to discard this condition. So basically, just like it says, you're stunned and you can't do anything until you kind of shake the cobwebs out of your head. Focus is a beneficial condition, and what it does, if normally you would attack with a blue and a yellow, you add a green. Whatever your normal attack is, you add a green to it when you roll. If a mission tells you to retrieve a token, you move next to it and perform an interact, pick the token up and place it on the figure's base, like this. That way everybody can see who has that item. If instead the mission tells you to control a token, you must be adjacent or own that token, and no hostile figures can be adjacent or own the token along with you. So there you have it. There's all the rules you need to know to get yourself started with Imperial Assault. Next time we're going to get into the very specific rules for campaign mode, how to set up a campaign, how to run a campaign, all that kind of stuff. Look for that in part 2, and then again part 3 will be our skirmish video. So thanks for watching. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like my channel, please subscribe. Find me on Twitter at boredonlineboardoffline. I'm on BGG, the Baker 1983. So until next time, if you're bored online, board offline.